So they hanged Haman on the gallows he made for Mordecai. Now here is a principle. Again, with Agag, Samuel says, as your sword has done this, it shall be coming back to you. Now, Haman, an Agagite, Haman builds a gallows that's going to come back at him. He's going to be hung on the very gallows that he built for his enemy. Isaac Newton came up with laws of physics. First law of motion, a body at rest remains in a state of rest unless it is compelled to change that state by a force impressed upon it. Translation, if you live with your parents, they provide for you, you're likely to remain in a state of rest and unemployment until they impress a change on you. In this life, what it would mean spiritually is this life needs a change impressed upon it by something outside this life, which is the gospel, God. Newton's second law of motion, change of motion is proportional to the force impressed upon it. Practical parents, going practical application. Your parents tell you they're going to kick you out of the house if you don't get a job, you're likely to go out and get a job. So if we need change, we need something to impress upon us. If we need total change, we need God to come into our lives. Newton's third law of motion, to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Probably the most famous one. But thousands of years before Isaac Newton, who was a Christian, by the way, declared the third law of motion, it was already in the Bible in this form. You reap what you sow. What you do produces an opposite reaction. Sow to the flesh, you reap destruction. Every action has a consequence. Your entire life has a motion. The book of Esther shows this with the gallows. Here, Haman builds the gallows, and yet it comes back at him. You reap what you sow. If you act against, you will be acted against. Evil builds its own gallows. People say, how can God send people to hell? The truth is, people send themselves to hell. Haman hung on the gallows he built. God's will, it says, is willing that none should perish. His will is salvation. His will is heaven. So why do people not go to heaven? C.S. Lewis said, there are two kinds of people, those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. Evil builds its own gallows, so don't fret. It ultimately has to live with that. You know, it's amazing because when you look at cultures, there are expressions throughout the world that bear witness in life of the truth of this that the Bible says. For instance, you make your bed, you sleep in it. You're digging your own grave. What goes around, comes around. You know, all that, if you play with fire, you'll get burnt. You know, he who lives in a glass house shouldn't throw stones. All these things are linked in some way. You're going to reap what you sow. I remember when I was in high school, I didn't know the Lord. And I wanted a guitar. I was in a rock band. I wanted to buy a guitar. And I had the plan I did is we had money for lunch every day. I just fasted. I didn't eat the lunch. I saved the money. My mother had no idea. Finally, I literally had, I think like $200. And I got the guitar. And I got what I need. I got all this stuff. And like right after it, somebody broke in the house and stole it. You reap what you sow. If you belong to organized crime, you're more likely than other people. It's more likely that you'll end up at the bottom of the Hudson River. More likely. Messiah said, he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. Same principle. Dictators who get their position by bloodshed are more likely to die by bloodshed. If you live by forcing things, more likely that a force will come against you to force you. Look at Saddam Hussein. Violent, sadistic, brutal man, took the lives of many innocent people, tortured them. How did he die? Violently by hanging. Actually, in the very place where he would hang or execute others. Muammar Gaddafi, violent man of terrorism, died violently. Interestingly, the day he ordered his people to rise up against Israel, his overthrow began. Osama bin Laden, violent man of bloodshed, died by bloodshed. You reap what you sow. The gallows you build will end up hanging you. French Revolution, the invention of the guillotine. First it was for the kings or the royalty, then enemies of the revolution. Then almost everybody was an enemy of the revolution. They started executing themselves, each other. They said the revolution devours her own children. People who live by bloodshed end up perishing. People live by, if you live by passing judgment on people, it'll come back to you. Herod the Great lived by oppression and bloodshed. He gained power by manipulation and killing his enemies. He even killed his family. He killed his sons. He killed his wife. The Emperor Augustus said, I'd rather be a pig with Herod than one of his family. Finally, he ends up killing babies in the account of Bethlehem. It goes right along with what we know of Herod. Yet, this baby is born in Bethlehem. You have a king with all the power, and you have a baby with no power. Which one had peace? The baby did. Herod had no peace in his life. He was paranoid. He was always afraid of being killed or of something. He was always afraid of his enemies. If you live by taking, you're never going to have peace because there's a law woven into creation that you live by taking, it'll be taken from you. If you live by giving, it's given to you. The gallows you built will hang you. Gossip. When you gossip, you are sinning against yourself, not only God and them, but yourself. When you gossip, it is going to come back at you somehow, even if you don't ever see how it is. You are bringing something negative, something sinful, something dark, and it's going to come back at you in some way. You may not see how, but it's going to come back. Whatever you do, that it says you shall reap what you sow. You break up a marriage.